Hello, I'm Maria Titizian.
And I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is the Week in Review.
Every week, we bring you the stories shaping Armenia and the region.
From politics and policy to social issues and conflict, we break down the news and what it means for you.
This week in the news, Azerbaijan releases 4 Armenian captives held in Baku. Armenia and the United States agree on implementation framework for TRIPP, and 2 Armenians confirmed dead amid ongoing protests in Iran. These stories and more in our weekly roundup of the news.
And we're back after a short break, and we're bringing some new elements to the Week in Review podcast, Maria. With parliamentary elections scheduled for early June, we'll be introducing a weekly segment called Election Digest. Though it's not really a segment, but we'll be talking definitely more. There will be a little bit of a package deal with about elections.
How much we don't want to talk about it, but we will.
We'll be tracking the campaigns, key players, and the issues shaping the vote. We've also seen a sharp rise in misinformation, disinformation, and the spinning of narratives. So we'll also be taking time to unpack those as well.
Yeah, we try not to fall into that trap oftentimes, right? The speculations on the controversies and all of that. But because we are heading into election year, there's been a huge uptick, and
especially in this last week with the release of the Armenian detainees from Baku, with everything that's happening, we already see narratives shifting. So maybe it's healthy to have this conversation.
Absolutely, and it's going to be quite a year. Interesting year, maybe a little frustrating and definitely unpredictable.
Well, so far we know what happened last week, so let's talk about that. So we start the week's podcast with good news. Azerbaijan released 4 Armenian captives held in Baku: Gevorg Sujian, David Davtyan, Viken Ulcekjian, and Vakif Khachataryan. They were handed over to the Armenian side at the Hakkari Bridge. Sujian, Davtyan, and Ulcekjian were detained during the 2020 Artsakh War, while Khachataryan was seized in 2023 while being evacuated from Artsakh by the Red Cross for urgent medical treatment. All of the captives had been tried, convicted, and sentenced to lengthy imprisonment. Ulcekjian, a Lebanese Armenian, had been sentenced to 20 years in prison. The others received 15-year terms. All 4 returnees are in satisfactory health condition. Khachataryan, who suffers from a chronic heart disease, underwent medical examination in Yerevan. Doctors say his condition is stable, and further treatment will be determined after additional tests. Khachataryan's case drew particular attention in 2023 when Azerbaijani forces removed the 70-year-old from a Red Cross vehicle as he was being transported from Artsakh to Armenia for emergency cardiac care. Despite this week's release, 19 Armenians remain in Azerbaijani custody, including 8 former Artsakh officials.
Well, once we got the news that our Armenian compatriots had been released, there was a lot of I don't know what the word is. We were thrilled, obviously, and also very emotional because it's been a very emotional situation. But then a few hours later, I think it was, Rubina, or an hour later, we heard that Yerevan announcing a separate move involving 2 Syrian nationals imprisoned in Armenia. Armenia's Justice Ministry confirmed that 2 Syrian mercenaries sentenced to life imprisonment for fighting on Azerbaijan's side in the 2020 Artsakh War had been transferred to Syria via Turkey to continue serving their sentences there. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan stressed that the transfer was not linked to the return of the Armenian detainees. He described the decision as a friendly gesture toward Syria aimed at advancing bilateral relations. He said Yerevan hopes the move will create a more positive climate, particularly for the Armenian community in Syria, and support broader humanitarian and diplomatic engagement between the 2 countries.
Well, the timing was very peculiar if these 2 were unrelated. And also this became a subject of a lot of discussion and also some media reports that were saying basically 2 mercenaries should have brought back 6 captives and more. And
calculations
taking place. And that was that really took away the joy for a moment that we experienced.
Yeah, and everybody was talking, not everybody, they were saying, this is a pre-election ploy, why did we give back the 2 mercenaries? And I wanted to say, like you just said, Rube, should we not be thrilled that 4 of our compatriots were brought back home and it became a political mudslinging opportunity?
Yeah. Well, another big news this week, Armenia and the United States have agreed on the implementation framework for the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity, or TRIPP, a major infrastructure initiative aimed at reshaping regional connectivity. The agreement was announced on January 13 in Washington, where Armenian Foreign Minister Arad Mirzoyan met with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Both sides highlighted the growing momentum in Armenia-U.S. relations and said TRIPP would become a central pillar of their strategic partnership. Rubio called the project a pathway to economic growth that would open Armenia to new trade and investment while fully respecting the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. He described TRIPP as a potential model for expanding prosperity without compromising national control.
Well, under the framework, TRIPP would create unimpeded multimodal transit routes through Armenia, linking Azerbaijan to its Nakhichevan exclave, while also promising reciprocal benefits for Armenia. This includes investments, job, transit revenue, and wider export access. A new TRIPP development company would manage the infrastructure for an initial 49-year term. The United States would hold a 74% share, Armenia 26% share, with the option for Armenia to increase its stake later. The document stresses that despite this structure, Armenia would retain full sovereignty over all project areas. Border and customs control is described as absolute and non-negotiable. Private operators may handle logistics, but Armenian officials would keep final authority over security screening, clearance, and law enforcement, with no outsourcing of sovereign functions. The framework also ties TRIPP to broader diplomacy, linking its success to progress in Armenia-Azerbaijan peace talks and Armenia-Turkey normalization. Washington sees the project not only as infrastructure, but as a strategic tool to anchor stability and economic integration in the South Caucasus.
Well, Armenian officials have offered new details on how TRIPP will be structured and who will take part. Foreign Minister Mirzoyan said the planned shareholding of the TRIPP development company reflects the real contributions of each side. The United States will provide the bulk of financing, while Armenia will contribute development rights over its territory and infrastructure. The current ownership model will run for 49 years, after which shares are expected to move closer to parity. Mirzoyan confirmed that neither Turkey nor Russia are partners in TRIPP, though he stressed Armenia does not intend to exclude Moscow from related regional projects, noting Russia's existing role in Armenia's rail and infrastructure sectors. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan called the framework a green light for long-term peace in the South Caucasus and credited President Donald Trump's personal engagement as decisive. He also voiced hope that the next step would be normalization with Turkey. And meanwhile, Azerbaijan discussed TRIPP and regional connectivity in talks with the U.S. Trade and Development Agency in Baku. Officials say the coming months will focus on turning the political framework into concrete infrastructure and investment plans.
During a press conference later in the week, Pashinyan hailed the framework as a cornerstone document of the peace process. He also emphasized the need to urgently formalize it into legally binding agreements. He said the total scale of investment will be substantial but cannot yet be quantified, noting that key elements such as railway construction require feasibility studies, engineering designs, and technical approvals. Pashinyan pointed to the U.S. decision to provide $145 million in assistance for Armenia as the first concrete step toward making TRIPP a reality. Addressing concerns over the planned front office, back office model, he insisted it fully safeguards Armenia's sovereignty, comparing it to the concession system at Zvartnots Airport, which has operated since 2002 without compromising state authority, territorial integrity, or sovereignty. All decisions will be made by Armenian state bodies, he stressed. Pashinyan added that TRIPP will bring advanced border and custom technologies already used in developed countries, expressing hope that these systems will eventually modernize checkpoints across Armenia.
And meanwhile, representatives of Armenia and Azerbaijan conducted a joint inspection of the Yeresk-Sadarak railway section to assess the technical suitability of the infrastructure for the movement of specialized railway construction equipment, a step towards potential restoration works. If operationalized, the route will restore to a railway link between Yerevan and Mehri via Azerbaijan's Nakhichevan exclave, a connection that existed during the Soviet period. The inspection comes amid amid discussions around reciprocity under the Washington Accords and the TRIPP framework, with some observers noting that while Azerbaijan would gain access to Nakhichevan, Armenia's reciprocal benefits have yet to be clearly defined.
Yeah, and this is very important, that it just doesn't become, a transit route between Azerbaijan and Nakhichevan. So this is very promising. Well, Armenian media are speculating that preparations are underway for the eventual opening of the Armenia-Turkey border. Reports say officials are assessing the condition of the railway line leading to Turkey from the Ahurik crossing in Shirak region. The same sources indicate that Armenian authorities plan to remove Russian border guards from that crossing, with a decision already taken and a new flagpole installed at the site. On the Turkish side, media outlets, these are Turkish media outlets, report active construction at the Markara crossing in Armenia's Armavir region. Work at the Alican border gate is said to be 90% complete, including new customs facilities and infrastructure for border procedures. Turkish authorities have also launched promotional campaigns encouraging future travelers from Armenia to visit Iktir and nearby areas, signaling expectations that the long-closed frontier could reopen in the foreseeable future.
And addressing border infrastructure, Prime Minister Pashinyan said bridges will need to be built along the Armenia-Turkey border, particularly at the Ahurik and Margara crossings. The Prime Minister added that power transmission lines along the Armenia-Turkey border are likely to be modernized, as part of the infrastructure still dates back to the Soviet era.
Speaking of Turkey, and this is where we're going to be talking about some of these interesting narratives that are being discussed on social media. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said Ankara wants the Azerbaijan-Armenia agreement finalized and Turkey-Armenia normalization implemented swiftly. He added that although there is political will among the leadership of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Turkey to move forward, Armenia must still take several steps. Fidan also expressed hope that the so-called Zangezur corridor will be implemented in line with Azerbaijan's expectations, calling it strategically important for regional connectivity. The Turkish foreign minister also commented on Armenia's upcoming 2026 parliamentary elections, saying Prime Minister Pashinyan is currently leading in opinion polls and that Turkey supports his constructive role in the normalization process. Now, we did a little bit of digging, and this is a direct quote of what Fidan said. Again, direct quote. We see that Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan is currently leading in public opinion polls. We genuinely support the constructive role he has played on this issue. This course, this political will needs to continue. Now, following these remarks, several opposition-affiliated Armenian media outlets and political figures framed Fidan's comments as Turkish support, direct Turkish support for Pashinyan in the elections, a claim Ankara did not explicitly make. So
if you can twist what it has been said and kind of weaponize it locally, why not?
Yeah, but then the ruling authority representatives were saying, but guys, hang on a second. Do you think that an Armenian electorate would vote for somebody that the Turks had endorsed? Like you're falling into this trap of trying to spin a narrative that doesn't make sense.
Well, we never know what makes sense to so many people and why they do it. And there's been a lot of speculation about, Azerbaijani gas and fuel coming to Armenia. That's been also kind of widely interpreted differently according to different agendas. Mm-hmm. However, we're expecting the second shipment of Azerbaijani fuel to Armenia, bringing 7,600 tons of petroleum products, 6,100 tons of gasoline, and 1,500 tons of diesel fuel. Prime Minister Pashinyan said the imports are already pushing prices down. Premium gasoline has dropped by 15%, diesel by about 2%, and regular gasoline now sells for around 460 drams per liter, compared to the 500 drams in mid-December. He expects further reductions as competition grows in a market long dominated by monopolies. And speaking of monopolies, maybe we're getting new ones, who knows?
Sure.
The fuel is being imported by Mega Trade, owned by the family of ruling party parliament member Khachatur Sukyasyan, and Shisha World, Very, very weird
Weird
name
name.
for a
I
company
know.
affiliated with businessman Samvel Alexanian. Economy Minister Gevorg Papoyan said Yerevan and Baku are also discussing possible Armenian exports, which might include aluminium products, ferromolybdenum, textile, tobacco, cognac raw materials, and greenhouse produce. No timeline has been set.
Well, this week was, like you said at the top, Rubina, very interesting. Signs of tension resurfaced in Armenia's relations with Russia after Kremlin-aligned television host Vladimir Solovyov openly suggested that Russia could launch a, quote, special military operation. This is the Kremlin's euphemism for its full-scale invasion of Ukraine against Armenia to safeguard its interests and zone of influence. In a heated monologue on his state television program, Solovyov drew parallels to the recent U.S. military intervention in Venezuela, where American forces captured President Nicolas Maduro. He described events in Armenia as far more painful for Russia than those in Venezuela, calling the potential loss of Armenia, quote, a gigantic problem. Dismissing international norms, he stated the time for games is over, to hell with international law and the global order. If it was necessary for us to start a special military operation in Ukraine for our national security, why, based on the same considerations, can we not start a special military operation in other points of our zone of influence? Anyway, this guy has a history of hostility toward Armenia, including repeated insults against Prime Minister Pashinyan, such as calling him Turkol instead of Nigol, I guess, and accusations of betrayal, which led to his shows being banned or blocked in the country since 2024. In response, Armenia's foreign ministry summoned Russian ambassador Sergei Kopyrkin and handed him a formal note of protest. Ani Badalian, who's the spokesperson for the MFA, described the remarks as an unacceptable encroachment on the sovereignty of the Republic of Armenia, a hostile manifestation, and violation of the fundamental principles of friendly relations between Armenia and Russia. Well, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova downplayed Solovyov's remarks as merely the opinion of a journalist, which was formulated in the form of a question, not a statement. She rejected presenting his remarks as Moscow's official position. But, Rubina, correct me if I'm wrong. Solovyov is, highly known or well known to be sort of the mouthpiece of the Kremlin.
Yes,
Yeah.
and even if nothing he says represents Kremlin per se, he's testing the waters.
Of course,
he serves a Kremlin purpose. And if he doesn't even announce for Kremlin, he does serve a Kremlin purpose anyway. That I think we can be sure of. Speaking of Kremlin, the Russian outlet Arbeka reported this week that the Kremlin has selected a newly established fund as a key financing source for Russia's soft power projects abroad, with Armenia designated as the top priority for 2026. I'm assuming we'll be citing Zakharova a lot this year. Well, last March, another Russian outlet, Vezimisty, had reported that first Deputy Chief of Staff of the Russian Presidential Administration, Sergei Kirienko, had assumed oversight of relations with Armenia. The focus reportedly centers on information campaigns rather than immediate electoral work. Sources indicated concern over Armenia's drift toward the West under Pashinyan, though Moscow faces challenges as pro-Russian politicians remain limited to former leaders like Serge Sargsyan and Robert Kocharyan. The assignment reflects a broader expansion of Kirienko's portfolio to include Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Moldova. We've seen his work in Moldova.
Yes,
We're learning a lot of lessons from there. And we do have a security report from April of 2025, last year already, where it's called Subversion and Electoral Interference, Russia and Armenia's 2026 elections. So this is when Kirienko was first handled the Armenia portfolio, and Dr. Nerses-Kopalian speaks about what to expect.
And now, speaking about our neighbor to the south, as the world has been following, there have been massive protests taking place all across Iran. It's been now, I think, almost a week that internet has been completely blocked in the country. Some people were able to get news out through Starlink, but even that now has been shut down, I believe. And there have been, concerns because we have a a fairly large Armenian community there. Ezare Sinanian, Chief Commissioner for Diaspora Affairs, reported today that 2 ethnic Armenians are among the casualties of the ongoing anti-government protests. Although there are reports of more Armenians killed, only 2 have been confirmed. I've heard up to 7 or 8. But
there are also reports of 12 Armenian casualties. However, the number of
we can't
casualties
confirm
in
anything.
general in
Yeah.
Iran has not been internationally confirmed.
Sure.
There's reports of thousands of
12,000, 3,000. So it's very hard for us at the moment. Now, in the meantime, we have a fairly large Iranian presence minority here in Armenia, and they've been holding protests right in front of the Iranian embassy. Well, Iran's ambassador to Armenia, Khalil Shirkholami, criticized the demonstrations outside their embassy held in support of the protests in Iran and accusing Armenian authorities of allowing the actions. Speaking at a press conference, Shirkholami said Iranian officials were unhappy with what he called a green light for protesters to gather daily outside the embassy, shouting insults and threats and targeting Iran's national symbols, despite repeated complaints to Armenian authorities. He warned the protests are harming Armenia's image in Tehran and claimed a perception is forming that Armenia is becoming a new center for the activities of Iran's enemies, adding that Armenia would suffer if external forces, including Israel, succeed in destabilizing Iran. But it's interesting because there have been protests in front of every Iranian embassy all over the world, right?
And there have been protests in Armenia for months. The opposition blocked roads and the government allowed it. For the ambassador to be saying this, there is really kind of either he's really desperate
indeed.
Or does not understand the context, Armenia's current context,
which is a weird democracy.
Yes.
Well, Armenia's interior ministry said police ensure the security of all diplomatic missions, including the friendly Islamic Republic of Iran, while stressing that Armenia cannot restrict citizens' freedom of movement or peaceful assembly. Prime Minister Pashinyan reiterated his government's commitment to addressing Iran's concerns, described Iran as a friendly and brotherly partner, and defended freedom of assembly. Pashinyan, speaking on Iran and TRIPP, said Armenia will not take steps that threaten Iran's security and expects reciprocity, noting the issue was discussed in detail during Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian's August visit to Yerevan following the Washington Peace Summit.
And now, returning to the ongoing conflict between Pashinyan and the church. The Prime Minister, along with 10 high-ranking clergy, announced this week the launch of a church reform process, along with the formation of a coordinating council to oversee it. The roadmap includes the retirement of Catholicos Garegin II, the election of an acting Catholicos, the adoption of a new church charter addressing financial transparency and clerical conduct, and the election of a new Catholicos of all Armenians. The senior clerics who are calling for the resignation of Garegin include the primates of 5 dioceses in Armenia, Ararat, Kotayk, Vayot, Zor, Armavir, and Masyat Zotan, the primate of Artsakh, and the primate of Western Diocese of the Armenian Church of North America, and the Diocese of the Baltic States.
Well, following this internal division within the church, the Catholicos removed Archbishop Gevorg Saroyan, the primate of the Masyat Zodan Diocese, from office. Pashinyan rejected the decision. It's not Pashinyan's place to decide what the Catholicos does, right, within the church. But he said that Gdrich Nersesyan, this is the name of the Catholicos, is not the Catholicos of all Armenians, and that his decisions have no legal or moral validity. He added that Bishop Saroyan continues to serve as the primate of the Masyat Zodan Diocese. Bishop Saroyan has since filed a lawsuit against the Mother See, seeking reinstatement as head of the diocese there.
Well, Pashinyan has done this before. He's basically declaring the Catholicos' decisions null and void.
Yeah.
Well, Defense Minister Suren Papikian says Armenia's armed forces recorded 0 deaths in 2025 linked to hazing or non-statutory relations, calling this exactly as how things should be. He reported a total of 6 deaths connected to military service last year, citing causes such as lightning strike, electrocution, suicide, or incitement to suicide, and health problems. Overall, 30 servicemen died in 2025 and 24 deaths classified as unrelated to service, including traffic accident, domestic incidents, and illnesses. However, fact-checking groups have challenged those figures. The fact investigation platform TRIPP says a murder was recorded in the army in 2025, the death of a contract serviceman, Ashot Dilanjian, who died after being severely beaten following a dispute with his commander. The Helsinki Citizens Assembly insists that the case is directly tied to military service and remains under investigation. The Defense Ministry, however, rejected this, arguing that video evidence shows the incident occurred outside a military unit where those involved were off duty and therefore does not contradict the official statistics.
Well, Babakian also spoke about the reduction of compulsory military service from 2 years to 18 months, describing it as one of the most significant reforms in the history of independent Armenia. He said the move had been carefully planned and made possible only after years of substantial military reforms. Babakian addressed criticism that the decision was a pre-election move that could weaken the armed forces, stressing that the reform was part of a long-term government strategy and possible only because of the successful implementation of prior defense sector improvements. Babakian urged women to take full advantage of the opportunities available for military service, emphasizing that outdated stereotypes remain the main obstacle preventing greater female participation. He said there are plans for an intensive public campaign to highlight the role and contributions of women in the armed forces. Babakian says, this was part of his annual sort of recap of what had happened. And during that speech, he said that he had personally dismissed several Defense Ministry employees whose sons hold foreign citizenship, calling the practice of using foreign citizenship to avoid military service a widespread and, quote, shameful problem.
And just to add, we didn't have this in the script, but we also have new army uniforms, Maria.
Yes, we do. You really wanted to say that, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Well, a Yerevan court, in other news, a Yerevan Court of Appeals has overturned a December 30 ruling that placed Samvel Karapetyan under house arrest, ordering that he be transferred back to pretrial detention. His legal team says Karapetyan has pneumonia and COVID-19 conditions they claim were not properly identified while he was in detention. Lawyers argue that his deteriorating health was a key factor in the original court decision and have criticized prosecutors for appealing the ruling instead of examining the circumstances surrounding his medical condition in custody. According to his lawyers, Karapetyan is currently hospitalized.
A court has extended the detention of podcast hosts Narek Samsonyan and Vasken Sagatelian by 3 months, prompting Samsonyan to declare an indefinite hunger strike. The two hosts were charged with hooliganism in November following a complaint filed with law enforcement by Parliament Speaker Alen Simonian. The case emerged after the hosts, known for their opposition views, conducted a 7-hour interview with former President Serge Sarkisyan. After the interview, Simonian criticized Sarkisyan in a post on his Telegram channel and used insulting language toward the podcasters. The hosts later responded in a separate broadcast with even harsher, more offensive and profanity-laden remarks directed at the parliamentary speaker.
So we do have an article about this as well by Anush Bekoya, and it's called Armenia's Hate Speech Blind Spot. Mm-hmm. She has a very interesting discussion about what's happening, and the beginning of her article is the case for the podcasters. Mm-hmm. And the Criminal Court of Appeals, in more pretrial detention news, the Criminal Court of Appeals has upheld the pretrial detention of Archbishop Arshak Khachaturian, the Chief of Staff of the Mother See, rejecting a defense motion for his release. Khachaturian was arrested a month ago and later charged with planting narcotics in another person's bag 7 years ago. The Archbishop denies the allegations. 3 other archbishops are also currently in custody. Archbishop Bagrat Galestanian of the Davush Diocese.
And in election news, this is our little election digest that we're going to be talking about. The Armenian Revolutionary Federation has announced that it will participate in Armenia's 2026 parliamentary elections as part of an alliance. Speaking at a press conference, ARF Supreme Body Representative Ishkhan Sagatelian said talks on forming an alliance will begin in the near future, with initial discussions expected to take place with partners in the opposition-led Armenia Alliance. He said the party's goal in the upcoming elections is to remove Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's administration. Asked whether former President Robert Kocharian would lead the alliance, Sagatelian said no final decision has been made.
And a group of activists have launched a new political movement called Bolorin Demem. I'm against everyone, and says it plans to form a party to run in Armenia's upcoming parliamentary elections. The group argues voters are being forced to choose between the bad and the worst, and says the electoral system fails to reflect public will. It proposes 3 key reforms: scrapping the stable majority provision, lowering the electoral threshold to 1%, and adding an against everyone option to ballots.
This is just so ridiculous. I can't. I'm sorry. Okay, but I'll let you finish reading.
Well, if elected, the movement pledges to form a 100-day transitional government to implement these changes and then call snap elections, after which it would dissolve. Parliamentary elections are expected on June 7 of this year. We can already say that. And just a reminder for everyone, there was a similar initiative that was like absolutely by actor and comedian Sergei Danielyan. Sergei Danielyan. He actually started kind of a political party and gave up
though.
And people became members, and they would qualify if they had decided to run. And the name was ridiculous as well, not unlike this one.
This is as ridiculous. Bolori Demem. Okay, what does that mean? I hate everybody. I'm just going to come in for 100 days. I'm going to make these 3 changes. Okay, we have severe security issues in the country. We have need for institutional reform, education, healthcare, social care. There's a million things going on that this country needs to address, right? And irenk bolori demen.
Well, according to the new law, they at least need to have 300 members.
I'm sure there'll be
to become a political
people to join them. Trust me, Rube. When people say, I'm not going to vote, or I'm going to burn my ballot, or I'm going to ruin my ballot, or whatever. I mean, this is not part of the democratic process. That vote is the most valuable right and responsibility you have as a citizen. Then if you don't do that, right, then don't complain.
Yeah, in 2008, there was this similar kind of initiative, or kind of I don't know what to call it. Everyone was voting for Chuck Norris.
I know, I remember.
And we know how those elections ended and what happened in 2008. So whatever seems like resistance or kind of this activism-y initiative is very unserious. And
ridiculous.
As you were saying, we need to really, really understand how serious the situation is.
Absolutely. But anyway, so, okay, let's talk about some of the articles we published, because we can go on complaining about many things. Sheila Pailan is back with her monthly column, Unleashed, and this first one of the year is called Make It Major. So she looks, we talk about quick fixes and perfect starts and New Year's resolutions and all of that, and making these life-shaping commitments. She encourages readers to stop quitting small promises and start pursuing the major goals that can truly change a life, and that we will fail, but we should keep trying anyway.
Well, we do have a very long and very in-depth article by Sosi Tatikyan, Iran's domestic crisis and implications for Armenia. As we talked about, and everyone knows, nationwide unrest and escalating repression in Iran are reshaping regional security dynamics, and with growing risks of external escalation. For Armenia, the crisis heightens exposure to broader instability, trade disruption, and diplomatic strain, testing Yerevan's ability to balance relations amid a shifting deterrence landscape.
Yeah, it's very, very in-depth, typical of Tatikyan's style. Yes. She doesn't leave any stone unturned. But it's an important piece for sure. We have a tech roundup by our creative tech editor, Ani Toroyan, called Why 2025 Mattered for Armenia's Tech Sector. And she says that while last year will be remembered as a turning point for the country's tech ecosystem, which included a year of long-term foundations taking place, she writes that while these developments open new opportunities opportunities, they also raise expectations. And if the past year was about setting direction, then this coming year will have to be about delivery.
And an interesting piece we published yesterday. A print shop in Kapan turns the page for former inmates. That's the title. A social enterprise in Kapan is giving former inmates a second chance through steady work in a community print shop, challenging stigma, rebuilding skills and social ties, and offering a rare model for reintegration in a system long shaped by punishment rather than rehabilitation.
Yeah, Lore Yumshadjekian, I really like her style of writing. She does a lot of, good reportage kind of writing for us. And it was a really cool piece. And one we published today, Cold Water's Long Nights, Tales of Sevan's Fishermen. This is by photographer Varina Ghazarian and journalist Kushane Chobanyan. The photos, they're almost atmospheric, right? They're quite beautiful. And it's a portrait of fishermen from the village of Noratus on Lake Sevan. And it reveals, the really hard work. Sometimes we forget, right, sitting here in Yerevan, but reveals nights of cold, risk, and fragile livelihoods. And it follows two fishermen, Armen and Bartan, as they navigate storms, shrinking catches, and limited choices. And it captures a community bound to the lake for survival and dignity. It's a beautiful
It's
photo
also very
story.
interesting. It's a very beautiful story. He went out with them during the night until morning. So we have that experience through his photos. But also to see, there's so much controversy about how fishing is being abused and how it's harming the lake's ecosystem and the variety of fish, and how a lot of fishermen have been in the news saying, we should fish as much as we can. This is our livelihood. We will not stop. And there's like almost contraband with fish. So there's always like this concerning, let me put it, situation when it comes to fishing and Lake Sevan. It was very interesting also to see this more.
And you did such a beautiful job with the choosing the photos and the layout, Rubina. It looks really pretty. And that's the kind of week starting off strong, 2026. I think it's an omen of what's to come. But have a safe and peaceful weekend, and we will be back again next week.